and the planning that was going on with that. So excited to hear how it all comes together for everyone. Also had the great privilege, I got to spend a week with our bishop and got to learn from her and from some other pastors, and it was a lovely time to connect, to learn, and to kind of think ahead. So thanks for the time away, and thanks to Lincoln for filling in for me last week. Jesus is in Jerusalem on the day after his triumphant entry, when his disciples are approached by someone who says, "We want to meet Jesus." And when Jesus hears this, his response is a little bit strange. It could almost sound suspicious or nonchalant. He says, "Unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone, but its death will produce many new kernels, a plentiful harvest of new lives." Jesus goes on to clarify that these words are for those who still imagine that they want to be his disciples, even though death is now on the horizon. It is both a proverb and a warning. The truth hidden within it is factual. Death precedes life, but the warning is personal. Jesus is announcing that he will be the first among them to die. Do you still want to follow? And then almost in the same breath, we hear Jesus wrestle, as we do, as he wonders aloud, "God, must it be this way?" And God responds in what is described as an audible voice to the crowds, though perhaps best discerned by Jesus himself. The path ahead will be painful, and there will be great loss. And yet even through this, God will be glorified. N.T. Wright says that Jesus was overthrowing the kingdom of the world and replacing it with the kingdom of God, but not through weapons that the world expects, not through domination, conquest, control, or violence. As Wright puts it, swords don't glorify the Creator God. Love does, self-giving love best of all. What Wright describes is a vision for transformation. Not something that's just personal, but something that has this great world-renewing project of God. It's the making of all things new. Creation being restored to what God intended it to be, a breath reminder that all is not well, but all will be well. And yet here we are, in a world still full of imperfection, still full of upheaval and disappointment and disaster. At times it can feel as though the kernel of wheat is trapped in a perpetual state of death, buried, waiting and waiting, with no visible signs of new life. But what if the invitation to transformation that is offered in John 12 begins right where we stand, right where we find ourselves right now? What changes in us when we begin to understand that the seed that Jesus talks about is not only about God's large-scale renewal of the world, but also about something far more tangible and immediate? What changes when we see the invitation to transformation is also about you and me? In John 12, Jesus offers us an invitation to be made new, but not according to our own expectations and not according to the expectations of a world so often shaped by selfish ambition and conquest. Instead, Jesus invites us into transformation according to his way, which is the way of self-giving love. It is an audacious invitation, but it's a beautiful one. And yet history will tell us a story that transformation is often co-opted by what Paul names in Romans 12 as the patterns of this world. Growing up, whenever I heard that phrase, it was usually connected to morality in a very narrow sense. It was used to monitor who you were with, where you went, what you watched, what you wore, and what you consumed. And while our choices do matter, that narrow framing often failed to name the deeper forces that actually resist transformation. The pursuit of empire-style power, the need to draw hard lines of belonging, the temptation to measure faithfulness by exhaustion, and the willingness to baptize what is opposed to God simply because it allows us to remain unchanged. And slowly, without noticing, the invitation to be transformed by the Christ we have encountered is so easily left behind. So how do we find our way toward being transformed by the Christ we have encountered? Romans 12 verse 1 suggests that we begin not with the pursuit of perfection, but rather with the pursuit of surrender. Some of you know, or perhaps you don't know, that once in a while you get this urge to take up something new. To take on a new hobby, to take up a new routine, a new practice. And generally, the best part of doing something new, of starting a new hobby, of getting into a new routine, is buying all of the things that are required for the hobby. So if you're into sewing, going to the fabric store, imagining all of the things you're going to make. If you're into fitness, thinking about going to the fitness store, checking out the mats and the weights, or the new outfit for the yoga class, the shoes for hiking, the storage box for the next creative project, we often tell ourselves that we want to feel ready before diving into something new. But sometimes, after purchasing all of those items, after watching the YouTube videos, after seeing the tutorials and following all of the social media pages and imagining the person we are about to become, we discover that getting ready and feeling ready is about as far as we are willing to go. And I wonder sometimes if transformation can feel that way. We want to be changed, but we also want to remain in control of what will and will not be made new. We want renewal and resurrection, but not if it means letting go of something we want to hold on to. We want to be known as committed followers of Jesus, but we don't always want it to cost us anything. We don't want to change too much, and we don't want it to ask us to release those things that perhaps have held us up. Sometimes, if we're honest, we want the idea of transformation without the surrender that makes transformation possible. But here in Romans 12, Paul writes, present yourselves. Not your perfect religious ideas, not your most polished theological convictions, not your best behavior, not your good intentions, and not your perfection. Simply present yourself, your ordinary, tired, complicated, beautiful, resistant, hopeful self. Now, when I was growing up, I often thought about transformation as this pursuit to arrive at what I imagined was perfection. I thought the goal was to finally become impressive enough, disciplined enough, faithful enough, polished enough. But transformation does not begin with perfection. Transformation begins with surrender. Because the mercy of God does not wait for us to become impressive. God isn't there waiting for us to become experts. God isn't waiting for us to become the perfect executors of the faith. Instead, Christ meets us with exactly where we are because somehow, by faith, we have chosen to take that first clumsy step. We've chosen to follow, even when we barely know what it means. The invitation is not a destination, but it is a posture that moves away from perfection and instead chooses surrender. Present yourself for those of you who long to not just carry the title of follower of Jesus, but wish to be shaped by Jesus, the Jesus you have encountered. And so what are you being invited to put down? What are you being invited to let go of, to surrender, as you allow your choice to follow Jesus to be more than words, but to become that which defines you? Transformation begins with surrender and not perfection. Romans 12 verse 2 goes on to say, let God change you into a new person by changing the way that you think. When I read this line, something I have read hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, it struck me in a new way. Paul knows something we often forget. Transformation is less about what we can force ourselves to become, and it is more about what God is able to do within us. So when we choose surrender, we are not choosing passivity. We are not choosing to simply stand back and watch. Instead, we are choosing to open ourselves up to the work of God. And Paul says that God begins with our minds. God begins by renewing the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, the way we see the world, and the way that we see God. And this is what I often describe as God reshaping our imagination. Something powerful happens when our view of the world begins to be shaped by the way and the message and the teaching of Jesus. Suddenly, how we see ourselves, how we see God and others must shift as our capacity to see and our imagination is shaped less by all that once formed us in exchange for that which Christ is forming in us. As we allow God to do the work of renewing our minds, God gives us a new way to see, and suddenly our neighbors are not a threat. Rather, they're someone made in the image of God. The stranger is not an interruption, but someone who may reveal Christ to us. Our position in life is not something simply to ignore, but sometimes it's something to examine with God. Our own lives are no longer measured only by how productive we are, how much control we have, but instead we begin to recognize our own belovedness and our continued journey towards surrender. And this is where transformation begins, with the ordinary and holy act of presenting ourselves to God and saying, "Here I am. Change the way I see. Change the way I love. Change the way I live and make me new." What a prayer that is. Make me new. But what happens when this prayer moves from the words we offer to the life we are living? In the remainder of Romans 12, Paul notes two things that emerge. First, it becomes evident that transformation is sustained in community. Paul moves from present yourselves and be transformed to we are many parts of one body. He reminds the people that they are not isolated individuals trying to become spiritually impressive on their own. They are members of one body and they belong to one another. Transformation is often presented as this quiet, private, spiritual project, just me and God and me, my personal growth, my quiet time, my calling, my spiritual life. And while there is something deeply personal about transformation, because no one else can do some of that work for you, Paul would not allow for transformation to remain private, because a renewed mind changes the way we see ourselves in relationships to the people around us. And it's there that we begin to understand that our gifts are not trophies, they're offerings. Our wisdom is not a tool for our excess. It's meant to inform how we serve. Our compassion is not simply a good personality trait. It is a part of how Christ becomes visible through us. Our leadership, our generosity, our encouragement, our teaching, our mercy and faithfulness are all given for the sake of the body. God does not transform us so we can become more impressive versions of ourselves. God transforms us so we can recognize that we are loved and so that we can become conduits of this love to others and they become conduits of that love to us. This is why community matters. There are things in us that cannot be transformed in isolation. We don't learn patience on our own, or forgiveness, or humility, or how to honor gifts that are different than our own by ourselves. We don't learn how to love the people who frustrate us or challenge us, those who disappoint us or see the world differently from us alone. Community is the soil where transformation takes root. And sometimes that soil is uncomfortable because community reveals the things in us we would rather not see. But it is within the community that we begin to identify, to practice, and to replicate what it looks like for God to form us, for God to shape us into a people who do not merely tolerate one another, but ones who belong to each other. The church was never intended to be this collection of spiritual consumers. The church is a body with different gifts and stories and wounds and capacities and ways of seeing the world. And somehow, by the mercy of God, we are joined together and made new. So transformation begins with surrender. It leads us to a mind that is renewed, being able to see differently, and we are reminded that transformation is sustained in community. And the second thing that Paul notes is that the evidence of a life being transformed is found in our actions becoming more and more informed by love. After Paul speaks about the body and its gifts, he begins to describe what transformation actually looks like in practice. And what is striking is that he doesn't make transformation vague or abstract. He brings it all the way down to our ordinary, everyday lives. He says love must be sincere. He calls the church to cling to what is good, to be devoted to one another, to honor one another, to be joyful in hope, patient in trouble, faithful in prayer. He tells them to share with those in need, practice hospitality, bless those who persecute them, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, and refuse to pay evil for evil. Live at peace as much as it depends on you, and overcome evil with good. This might seem like just a random list of nice things to do, but instead, this is what a renewed mind begins to produce. Because when God changes the way we see, God also changes the way we live. The patterns of this world will tell us love only when love is convenient. Honor people who can benefit you, protect yourself from the needs of others. Meet harm with harm and insult with insult and power with power. But Jesus teaches us another way. He teaches us to love sincerely, to honor one another, to practice hospitality, and to overcome evil with good. And this is where we have to tell the truth. This kind of love will cost us something. It will cost us our need to always win, our desire to remain untouched by others, and the illusion that we can follow Jesus without being changed by Jesus. And so it becomes this life we enter, a way we practice, and a surrender we return to over and over and over again when we learn to lean into love. And this brings us back to the kernel of wheat. Jesus says that unless the seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. And maybe that's the part we might want to skip. Because a seed looks very safe and productive when we hold it in our hand. It feels preserved and protected. But the seed cannot become what it was created to be while it remains in your hand. At some point, the seed has to be released. It has to fall into the soil. It has to surrender its old form so that new life can emerge. I think about the way that a garden begins. If you garden, you know that most of the work happens before anything looks beautiful. The soil is turned over and disturbed. Seeds disappear beneath the surface. And for a while, it looks like nothing is happening. There are no flowers, no green buds, no fruit, no harvest, only dirt. But beneath the surface, something is breaking open. Something is reaching downward for strength and upward toward the light. Eventually, what looked like burial becomes the beginning of new life. And I wonder if this is how transformation often works. There are moments when surrender to God feels like loss, when community is nothing more than discomfort, and when love feels like dying to a version of ourselves who would rather stay defended and distant. But in the economy of God, surrendered things are not wasted things. Buried seeds are not forgotten seeds. Hidden work is not fruitless work. The life of Jesus tells us that death does not get the final word, but self-giving love does. So maybe the question for us is not only do we want to be transformed, maybe the question is, what are we still holding in our hands? What is in us that needs to be surrendered? What patterns of this world have we mistaken for wisdom? What need for control has kept us from surrender? What fear has kept us from love? What resentment has kept us from peace? What comfort has kept us from hospitality? What version of ourselves are we still trying to preserve, even though Christ is inviting us to be made new? Maybe the invitation is not to leave here determined to become perfect. Maybe the invitation is more ordinary, to present ourselves to God, to let God renew the way that we see, to allow ourselves to be formed in community, to practice love until it becomes more than an idea, and to entrust God to the parts of ourselves we have been trying so hard to preserve. And so today, if you sense there's something in you that God is inviting you to surrender, if you sense that there is something that kind of requires you to lay it before God, at the close of the service, as the worship team comes up, and they can come up. As the worship team comes up, Lincoln will be in the back and I will join him in a moment, and we will be there to pray with you if this is something you want to talk through or something that you'd like to receive prayer for. And so today, I want to offer you a way forward that is simply says this: here I am. That as you go before God, that you can say, here I am, longing to surrender, even though I'm afraid of the cost. Here I am, wanting to see the world as you see it, even though I'm still blinded by all that is broken, by that which leaves me undone. Here I am in the community, yet so afraid to belong to community. Here I am having encountered great love, but not always willing to allow this great love to change how I love others. Here I am. Change the way that I see. Here I am. Change the way that I love. Here I am. Change the way that I live. Make us new. Amen.